The mud came back the way it always came back on the prairie, all at once and without apology, swallowing the yard to the ankle and turning the track from the road into something that had to be negotiated rather than walked. She was crossing it with a bucket of kitchen scraps for the chickens when he said it. Said the thing he'd told her a year ago was the whole of the arrangement, and told her now he'd been wrong. She stopped in the middle of the yard. The bucket hung from her hand. The chickens did not stop their noise for it. To understand what those words cost him, you'd have to go back to a train platform in Rostern, Saskatchewan, on a Thursday in late October, the year the drought came down on the province like a hand-pressed flat. The station master had let her wait inside, only because the wind off the open fields was the kind of wind that meant business. And she had been on that platform since morning with a cardboard suitcase, a wool coat that had seen better winters, and a letter from a man she had never met. The letter had offered work, not marriage. He'd been clear about that in the advertisement, clearer still when he wrote back to her response. I need someone to keep the house and look after 3 children. I am not looking for a wife. If that's understood, we can discuss terms. She had understood. She had her own reasons for finding that arrangement acceptable, and she did not examine them on the platform. When the truck came down the main road and turned into the lot, she recognized it from his description. A 28 Ford with one mismatched door, the color of old pennies. He did not get out right away. He sat with the engine idling and looked at her through the windshield the way a man looks at a weather gauge, not with hostility, with assessment. When he did get out, he was taller than she'd pictured from the letter. He had the look of someone who had been bigger once, before whatever the last 2 years had taken from him. He didn't shake her hand. He looked at the suitcase. That all you've got? Yes. He picked it up without another word and put it in the truck bed. She climbed in on the passenger side before he could come around to help her, which she understood, even then, was the first thing she did that made him recalibrate his expectations by a fraction. They were nearly out of town when he said it, eyes on the road, one hand low on the wheel. I'll say this once so it's settled. I need someone to keep house, not a wife. A pause not awkward, more like a nail being set before the hammer. I don't want there to be any confusion about what this is. She looked at the fields going past, flat and gray under a November sky. There won't be, she said. He nodded. He did not speak again until the farm came into view. The house was what a house looks like when a man has been keeping it alone for 2 years with 3 children and no one to tell him what he was getting wrong. There was a system to it, of a kind, but it was the system of a man managing, not living. Wood stacked high on the porch, which was right. A cracked window in the kitchen patched with cardboard, which had probably been temporary for 8 months. The yard was clean enough, but the garden plot along the south side had gone to thistle and frozen there. She took it in without comment. He took her suitcase up the steps and set it just inside the door, and the 3 children who had been behind it, watching through the gap, scrambled back when it opened. The oldest, a boy, stood against the wall with his arms crossed. He would be 12 or close to it, she thought. He had his father's jaw and his father's way of standing, already practicing the posture of a man who did not need anything. His name was Birch. The younger boy, Cole, was 8, with ears too large for his face and a watchfulness in his eyes that was older than 8. He held the doorframe with both hands and stared. The youngest was a girl. She might have been 5. She had dark curled hair escaping a braid that had not been tended to recently, and she held a tin cup against her chest with both hands the way another child might hold a toy. Her name was Dottie. None of them said hello. She hadn't expected them to. Kitchen's through there, the man said. Stove's been temperamental. Flue needs a full quarter turn to draw, or it'll smoke back. I'll learn it. He looked at her a beat longer than the sentence called for. Then he went back out to the truck. The kitchen smelled of fried meat and something burnt underneath, and the particular cold grease smell of a stove that hadn't been cleaned since summer. She set her coat on the hook nearest the door, not the hook at the far end where a woman's coat had hung and been taken down at some point and not replaced. She could see the lighter patch of wall behind it. and she began without being asked to open cupboards and take stock. Dottie followed her from the doorway. She did not come in. She stood with her tin cup and watched the woman's hands moving along the shelves. There was flour, oats, half a tin of lard, dried beans, a jar of something dark and unlabeled that turned out to be chokecherry preserves, coffee, salt, a bottle of vanilla extract gone nearly empty. Supper would be possible. Not generous, but possible. She knelt at the stove and found the flue where he'd said, and turned it the full quarter turn, and then another half, because the quarter turn hadn't seemed like enough. She was right. The draw improved on the first attempt. When she stood up, Dottie was still in the doorway. The tin cup was no longer against her chest. It was extended slightly in the woman's direction, not as an offering, more as a question. "I'll fill that in a moment," she said. "Can you wait?" Dottie looked at her for a long moment, the way a small child looks at something unfamiliar, measuring. Then she pulled the cup back and waited. It was the first agreement they made. By the time the man came back in from the barn, there was a smell in the kitchen that had not been there in some time. Oat porridge, thickened and stirred through with a spoon of the chokecherry preserves. Not much. Enough. He stood in the doorway with his hat still on and looked at the table, which she had cleared and set with 4 plates. "There's a 5th plate," she said. Not a question. She had found it herself on a high shelf, separate from the others. He went to the shelf and took it down and set it at the table himself, not looking at her. And that was the whole of it. 5 plates went on the table that first night, and no one remarked on it. He ate without comment, which she understood within the first week to be the shape his approval took. When the biscuits came out right on the 4th morning, he had 2 more than seemed reasonable for a man who ate efficiently and without display. That was the whole of his praise, and she found it adequate. Cole tested her. It was not personal. It was the kind of testing a boy does when something new comes into a house and he needs to know if it will hold. A field mouse left in the flour tin. A chair leaned against the pantry door so it would fall when she opened it. She dealt with the mouse without raising her voice and stepped over the chair as if it had always been there. And by the 2nd week, he had run out of interest in testing her the way a dog loses interest in a fence that doesn't rattle. Birch was different. He did not test her. He simply refused to acknowledge that she had any permanent claim on the house. He ate what she cooked. He did his chores. He answered questions put directly to him. But he did not look at her the way Cole did, gauging and reassessing. He looked through her, the way a man looks through a window at weather he's already decided to wait out. She did not push. She had learned something in the years before this one about waiting out a thing that could not be rushed. The first hard cold came in November, the kind of cold that arrived with no particular announcement and stayed. She was up before anyone, same as always, and found that the pump in the kitchen had frozen in the night. She didn't mention it until the man came in from the barn. She had already dealt with it. Boiling water poured slow down the casing, the cloth wrapped after, but she mentioned it so he would know for the next time. He looked at the pump, then at her. "My father used to pack it with straw before freeze-up," he said. "Where's the straw?" "Barn." "I'll do it this afternoon." He put his hand on the pump and worked the handle once. Water came. He nodded the way he nodded at most things she did that had been done correctly. Once, brief, and done. That became the shape of the early winter. Small problems named, dealt with, noted. Not as conversation exactly, but as a kind of exchange that was its own vocabulary. She found the children easier to read than she'd expected. Cole was curious about everything and hid it badly. He would appear wherever she was working and ask questions disguised as statements. "That's a lot of onions," and wait to see if she'd explain. She usually did. He ate the information up the way he ate her cooking, fast and with the same focus. Dottie had stopped waiting in doorways by the 3rd week. She came into the kitchen and stood at the woman's elbow and watched her hands with an attention that was not childlike at all. One morning she handed the woman a spoon before she'd reached for one, and the woman took it without comment, and something shifted between them that neither of them could have named. Birch remained at a distance. He remained there so consistently that she began to understand it as its own kind of communication, that he was watching from further away than the others, and that what he was watching for was whether she would still be there to watch come spring. She didn't blame him. She was watching for the same thing herself. The man from the bank came in January. Young, fair-haired, wearing a coat too thin for the weather. He stood in the yard and spoke in the careful voice of someone delivering a decision he had not made and would not be altering. She was inside, near enough to the window to hear most of it. She didn't move away. When the man drove back down the road, she put the kettle on. The farmer stood at the fence for a long while, looking at the east field. Not the north field, where the real trouble was. The east field, which was fine. She understood that looking at the fine thing was how you gave yourself time to think about the other one. She brought him coffee when it was ready, set it on the fence post next to his hand, went back to the kitchen. He came in an hour later and ate supper without speaking, and when he was done, he sat with his hands flat on the table and looked at nothing in particular, and she did not try to fill that silence. She had learned by then that silence in that house was not the same as absence. It was where he kept things he didn't have words for yet. The blizzard came in February. It had been building for 2 days. She'd seen it in the color of the sky to the northwest, a particular yellow-gray she'd come to know meant weather. And she had brought the chickens in and filled every pot in the kitchen and banked the stove before it arrived. The man had spent those 2 days in the barn, doing things she didn't ask about, coming back in after dark with his eyebrows frosted and his hands red at the knuckle. On the second night, Birch went out to the barn before supper to check the horses. He did not come back. She knew it before the man did, because she had been watching the yard through the kitchen window the way she'd been watching the yard for 4 months. Not anxiously, but attentively, the same way you watch a stove you're not sure of. She timed it. 15 minutes, then 20. The visibility was 2 feet past the porch rail. She had her coat on before she went to get the man, and she had the lantern lit. He didn't waste time on questions. He took the lantern, she took the spare rope from the hook by the door, and they went out together into the white noise of it. She could not have said afterward how long it took, long enough that her face had stopped feeling like her own face. They moved in the direction of the barn because there was no other direction that made sense, calling the boy's name into the wind, which swallowed it as fast as it left them. She held the end of the rope, and he held the lamp, and they moved. And the yard she had crossed 1,000 times since October was completely foreign to her. They found Birch in the barn. He'd made it. His knee had twisted on the ice at the threshold, and he dragged himself to the hay, and he was sitting against the stall door when the light found him, pale and furious and frightened in equal measure. The man lifted him without a word. She went ahead with the lantern. She did not know what passed over the boy's face in that moment. She was facing the other direction, into the dark, but she knew what it sounded like. A boy making a sound that was not quite crying because he was 12 and had decided he was done with that, but that was close to it. And she knew what the man's voice sounded like, saying something low and specific into the top of the boy's head, too quiet for her to hear and not meant for her anyway. She went ahead with the lantern. That was what she could do. Inside, she had the boy's boot off before the man had him sat down, and she had the knee wrapped before he'd found his words again. Cole stood in the hall doorway, white-knuckled on the frame. Dottie was beside him with the tin cup held against her chest again, which was what she did. The woman had learned when she was afraid. "It's not broken," she said, which she couldn't know for certain, but she was reasonably sure, and the reasonably sure version was what that kitchen needed right then. Cole's hands loosened on the frame. She put Dottie to bed first, then Cole, then went back to sit with Birch while the man saw to the horses. Birch did not speak for a long time. She did not fill it. She had a bowl of warm water and she kept the cloth on his knee changed when it lost the cold. At some point he said, "I wasn't scared." "I know," she said. He looked at her, for the first time without looking through her. "Were you?" She considered that honestly. "For the first minute," she said. "After that, I just thought about the next step." He didn't answer, but he stopped holding himself rigid against the back of the chair. When the man came in, he stood in the doorway with the lantern still in his hand, looking at the two of them, the boy with his knee wrapped, her with the cloth and the bowl. And he stood there long enough for her to notice the way she noticed most things in that house. Quietly, and without looking directly. He set the lantern down and got himself a cup of water and said nothing at all, and in the morning he did not mention the night before. She understood that this was the shape his gratitude took. Spring came the way it came on the Saskatchewan prairie, in stages that did not commit. A thaw in March that turned everything to brown water and then refroze. Another try in April, slower, more serious. The mud came first, always the mud, and then beneath the mud, the grass remembering its color. She had been keeping a count on the sill of the storeroom, not with marks, but with small things, the way Cole kept things on the sill above the wash basin. A button, a chip of blue crockery she'd found in the garden in October, a flat piece of sandstone that caught the afternoon light a certain way. She hadn't told anyone what she was counting toward. Dottie's birthday was in March. She would not have known about it if Cole hadn't mentioned it in passing one morning, leaning against the kitchen wall while she made bread. Dottie's birthday's next week. We usually don't do anything. Papa doesn't remember dates too good. Said it without accusation, just as information, the way Cole offered most things. She made a cake. Butter was scarce, so she used lard and compensated with a spoon of vanilla, the last of the bottle she'd found nearly empty in October. The cake was flat and a little dense, and she put a single candle in it that she found at the back of the drawer. Dottie ate 2 pieces and did not make a fuss, though her chin did a thing at the first bite that the woman looked away from, because it was private. The man noticed the empty vanilla bottle on the shelf. He said nothing about it. 2 weeks later, he came back from town with a new one, which he set on the shelf without comment, the way he set down anything he did not want thanked for. By April, Birch was carrying wood in for her without being asked. Not every day, some days. But when he did, he set it where she kept it, not where it was easiest to drop, and that was the whole of it. She said nothing about it. She noticed it the way she noticed the other things, the way the stove drew now that she'd learned it. The way the third step from the porch had been recut and reset one morning in late March, solid now, no give to it at all. She hadn't asked him to fix that step. She'd only stopped stepping over it. Cole's windowsill had 6 things on it by the time the snow was truly gone. A pine cone, the inner curl of birch bark, a piece of quartz with one vein of pink running through, a crow feather, a nail bent into a shape that was either a letter or a running horse depending on the angle, and a piece of amber glass frosted from weather. He never said they were for her. She never asked, but she had stopped not looking at that windowsill the way you stop not looking at something that has become part of what a place is. Dottie had started calling her something. Not her name. She didn't have a name in that house, not officially. But Dottie had arrived at a word for her, something particular to Dottie's own usage. A shortened thing, a word that had traveled through the girl's private logic and come out as its own small coin. She used it the way she used the tin cup, held close, brought out for occasions that required it. The first time it happened, the man was in the kitchen doorway with an armful of wood, and he went still. She did not look at him. She tucked Dottie's collar flat and said something ordinary about breakfast. She heard the wood set down on the stack, slowly. He went back out without saying anything, and she thought, standing at the stove, that the space behind her stayed warm a little longer than the draft from the door could account for. The mud was still in the yard the afternoon. She was crossing it with the bucket of kitchen scraps. The chickens making their noise, the sky above the west field, going the pale gold it went at 4 in April when the clouds had something to say and hadn't said it yet. He was at the fence, not checking anything. He had finished checking the fence that morning. Standing at it, the way he stood sometimes when something needed thinking through, and he wanted a reason to be somewhere other than inside. She had crossed this yard 600 times since October. She knew every low spot, every place the frost heave had lifted the ground, the track the truck tires had worn from the gate to the barn. She had stopped thinking about crossing it. She just crossed it. He turned from the fence when she was halfway across. He said, "I said when you came that I needed someone to keep house." She slowed, stopped. The bucket hung from her hand. The chickens did not stop their noise for it. That was true enough when I said it. He looked at the field, not at her. It's not the whole of it anymore. She waited. She was good at that. He turned from the fence and looked at her directly, which was something he did rarely and always meant something. "I don't need someone to keep house," he said. "I need you." The prairie wind came across the yard, carrying the smell of thaw and turned earth and something green underneath that hadn't been there since September. It lifted a strand of her hair and set it back. She set the bucket down in the mud. It didn't tip, it sat. She crossed the yard toward the fence the same way she had crossed it 600 times. Without hurry, chin level, looking at the thing she was walking toward. She stopped close enough that the wind off the west field came between them instead of around them. He did not move back. The chickens carried on. Somewhere behind her, at the kitchen window, she thought she heard a sound that might have been small feet on a floorboard, or might have been the house settling the way it settled at this hour. She did not look back to check. She had not yet said anything. She found, standing there in the mud of the yard, she had learned the same way she had learned the stove and the pump and the slow thaw of a house that had gone cold and was finding its warmth again that she did not need to.